Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my top 5 tips for surviving and even succeeding at the Gauntlet. Now, I myself am a softcore enjoyer. I love to do softcore trade. Obviously, I have a lot of builds based around such, but the past couple Gauntlets, I've tried it out. I've had a lot of fun doing it. This, for example, is where I died to Uber Elder, which means we did a lot of not dying before then. So hopefully what I'm going to tell you now, which worked for me, maybe works for you, helps you get through the campaign or even to some of the later bosses as well. Not necessarily meant for a hardcore professional that already knows a lot of this stuff, but for somebody who's just thinking about maybe I'll try out Gauntlet, I haven't tried it out before, this I think will help you a lot and hopefully help you have a lot of fun in the Gauntlet. Now, tip number 1. It starts out right at the beginning. Most of these tips are focused around stuff that'll help you get past the campaign and successfully into maps where the Gauntlet mods get progressively easier. When you look at the modifiers, you will notice that the campaign mods are really sketch. Also, last Gauntlet, they had a bunch of special stuff, added mechanics to each of the campaign boss fights, which means a lot of that stuff is really dangerous, and often the hardest part of the whole Gauntlet is just getting through the campaign. So that's why I'm focusing on this. That's why I'm emphasizing early power, is because if you can get through Act 10, if you can complete the campaign, then white maps, yellow maps, and red maps honestly aren't so bad. They're more chill. If you have a fairly good character, there's a chance where you can farm a good setup and you can attempt some bosses. So let's get you through the campaign. That's my thought process. So step number 1, or biggest tip I'd have, is muling early on can help you a lot for your early power. The hardest zone in the campaign for many people is the Roas in mud flats. That's one of the first checks where your character will just get stun locked and die. And one of the ways to beat this basically power check, skill check, whatever you want to call it, is muling. What does muling get you? Early on, when you kill Hillock with a level 1 character, you're getting 3 wisdom scrolls that are on your character. You're getting basically 5 white items, maybe 2 blues, maybe a rare from Hillock's drops itself, which you can vendor for more scrolls of wisdom, or maybe you'll get a unique randomly. Very rare, but sometimes you get a unique. And then on top of that, the most important thing is you get new vendor windows. Every single time you create a new character, this window will get refreshed with different options. Generally, when you're running through the campaign, the vendor windows take a few levels, like, I don't know, 4 or 5. I don't know what the exact numbers is, but it doesn't really reset very often or very quickly with new items. So you can go through and say, I want to find a 3 blue link, but if your initial vendor window doesn't have it, it's not very likely that by the end of the camp or end of Act 1, you're going to find that 3 link. So often doing vendor resets with fresh characters helps you get A, your initial 3 link, or B, some initial power items to ensure you don't die to Roas. A good example is something like a coral ring. Your character starts out at about 70 HP, which means 30 HP in terms of the overall perspective for how tanky your character is giving you the equivalent of like 30%, 40% more overall HP, which is a very big difference in whether or not you chain die to Roas or take a couple hits and then get to walk away not dead. So one advice I have is buy coral rings and get yourself something like a chain belt. Chain belt, inherently having ES on your character gives you an innate 50% chance to avoid stun. So doing muling for coral rings, a chain belt early on, huge for your tank. And then obviously resetting the vendor windows in order to get a good set of links. For example, you could find like a 3 green if you're doing like a poison concoction run, maybe a 3 blue if you're doing a magma orb run, maybe a specific axe base type to start out for early ground slam if you're a sunder, if you want to progress towards sunder like on a marauder, stuff like that. So checking your vendors for the link combination you need, getting coral rings, and getting the ES belt for some avoid stun. Stuff like that helps a ton for your initial, I'm not trying to die in the first few zones of the campaign. Another thing I will say is muling is not necessarily created equal. When you go to create a character, I'm going to go ahead and delete this character just for the sake of showing it. You have the option to choose between a ranger, a scion, a duelist, a witch, a marauder, a shadow, and a templar. And just quite frankly, melee skill characters, I think, are much more likely to have a harder time on Hillock. If they add extra mechanics to Hillock, Hillock can be maybe kind of dangerous for melee, which means Templar has Freaking Glacial Hammer, melee skill. Shadow has Viper Strike, melee skill. Marauder has Heavy Strike, melee skill. And Duelist has Dual Strike, melee skill. Whereas Witch has Fireball, Burning Arrow, and Spectral Throw. What I would say, if the Hillock fight is a bit hard, doing your mules as something like a ranger with Burning Arrow may prove to be significantly easier. So check out something like that if you're trying to mule for some extra gear. Look at the classes that are easier at baseline level 1 at killing that Hillock, and you might have a nice time in terms of not spending too much time getting a few vendor treks where you get to check for some links you want or coral rings, chain belt. You get the idea. Get that initial power going. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is pick an Ascendancy with a big first lab and second lab power spike. You can always respec with gold. What do I mean by that? So when you go through and you look at the Freesia Ascendancies, certain Ascendancies might be the class you want to play, but their initial lab is not very strong. The hardest part of the whole gauntlet, I'm going to keep rehashing that, is the campaign, which means you really want to leverage your power on that first and second lab, because that's the part that gets you through the campaign. Now, as for an example showcase of the fact you can respec Ascendancy points, this is a level 40 character on a fresh run. I have gambled some. I have already done some respecking. I have about 1,000 gold in roughly about the end of Act 4, level 40. And to respec my entire Ascendancy at this point, my normal lab, it would cost me roughly about 1,200 gold. So you can see respec cost is fairly proportional with the gold you've generated throughout the campaign. Is very forgiving. So what I would suggest is, depending on what class you are, look at the other Ascendancies to see if there's another Ascendancy that has a bigger power spike. For myself specifically, I am considering doing an Oshabi character run. Now the thing about Oshabi is, the first lab, Oath of Magi, is pretty good, but my follow-up labs, if I was doing a poison build, would be good, or if I was doing attack-based evasion, that gets good with gear. But the thing is, in the campaign, I don't have gear, and I want to do a hit-based character, so my second lab wouldn't necessarily feel very impactful. So what I'm going to do for my start is, instead of starting with a Oshabi character, I'm going to start with a Whisperer character, because the 4 min charge is a very strong initial giga spike of power. On top of that, the second lab is very synergistic. Awaken Fork is very good for clear, and it'll feel very good. I'm planning on doing a Ballista Power Siphon setup. We'll see how it turns out, but the point I'm making here is the first 2 labs are very, very big value, whereas if I did Oath of Magi, this one's hard to make work because you have to have your gear not socketed, and sockets in the campaign can be kind of rough. And then on top of that, the second lab doesn't feel good. So my thought process is, I'll start with something I know is going to be stronger right out of the gate. Box power is good, or right out of the box, the power is good, versus something where it might be a little bit scuffed in the campaign. Because the thing is, the hardest part of this whole situation, I'm going to keep saying it, it's beating the campaign. These mods are very, very dangerous. They're going to be quite hard, especially if there's extra mechanics going on. And so you want as much power as you can. So I'm going to point out some obvious first lab power spikes that are kind of just insane compared to other options. So one option here is, let's say you're playing a shadow base. Let's say you're looking at doing your Broodguard Ascendancy. This is a very strong second lab, and it's awesome for that. But what do you have to grab as your first lab? 50% chance for minions poison on a shadow start. That might not be necessarily a good time to try to make minions work early on with your first lab, and you're going to slog through a bit of lacking of power. So what I would suggest is potentially considering an Envy lab and respecking over, because Envy is very good, or even doing a starter where you're not playing a minion build at all. Maybe you Ghost of the Deep with that initial giga speed to help you get to the point where you can go to Cruel Lab faster. Something like that is a good example of that early power being much stronger if you just leverage an Ascendancy respec. Same thing goes for the Witch classes, except for the Witch classes, I gotta be honest, the Witch classes are real rough as in terms of early power. I don't really know how you make one of the Witch classes feel good. I can't point in a node and be like, yeah, that's a good first lab, because most of these labs are just rough. Maybe you could argue Felfen feels good to just have a zeroed out Chaos Res if you can't find Chaos Res in the campaign, but I don't know. These Witch Ascendancy choices are just rough, I think, early on. So good luck if you're a Witch. I wouldn't want to be starting one. As for the Templar start, best first lab to me is the Devout of Ralakesh. +3 of every min charge is very strong, very good all-arounder. Or if you're doing something like an anime weapon build, Marionettes is insane. So look at your options, consider a respec. If you're playing something like a Marauder Ascendancy, just don't click this. Don't click Behemoth. It's probably, you're going to find out there's a lot of things that are labeled as spells and it's going to feel real bad. I would consider something like 3-minute max endurance, or potentially something where you're converting half of enemy damage to fire, which helps your phys mitigation insanely. Stuff like that. So that's the idea, is make sure when you're picking your Ascendancy or picking your class, look at your other early options, because they might just be much stronger for what you're trying to build, even though late game you want to be a different Ascendancy. That is something I would heavily consider. The next thing I would say is during the campaign, Overlevel Overgear. The way you die is you try to run the campaign at a normal pace. If your level is like under the level of the zone you're in, you're probably at a much riskier spot than you would be otherwise if you overleveled. Overleveling will make you take longer, but what's better? Dying or not dying and have to rerun to that point. So I'd recommend make sure you're always overleveling, always overgearing. You're very unlikely to die if you're doing the easier content to farm up your gear and then proceeding versus just trying to push through at a fast rate. So word of caution, word of the wise, I would recommend overleveling and overgearing throughout the campaign. 100% check out the Gambler. If there's certain pieces you just have a bad rare for, check out the Gambler for that stuff. It can be very good, as well as Mercenaries can be decent for rare gear as well. The one caution with Mercenaries is before going in the Gauntlet, you kind of want to know which Mercenaries are more dangerous than others. Certain Mercenaries with certain skills are just way rippier than others. This is something where you can't really prepare for unless you had an idea of going through playing softcore and dying to certain Mercenaries over and over again. For myself, the Mercenary, the Sanguimancer, I'm just going to avoid altogether. That Fizz Dot, I don't want to play with that. So know your own risk and tolerance threshold, but that is a good place to get some gear if you can do it on some of the easier Mercenaries to defeat. Next up, I would say have some sort of personal rule for logging out. Now, as a softcore player, I had no log out brain at all. This is something where I felt like I learned it when I started trying to do hardcore more often than not. I would be like, okay, I just died from a completely avoidable thing where I could have logged. I'll give you an example. Here's a good example of you could have logged, but my brain wasn't really developed to the point of thinking logging out is important. I start seeing Red and Maven. This is a big wave of it, basically expands and then does a big one-shot mechanic. This thing is tankable. I've tanked it in softcore a lot of times. There's a certain threshold of tank you need. Now, when you start seeing that go red, it means you messed up the memory game. You're not probably going to be able to succeed or clutch it out. Just log and re-enter the zone so that way you can do another attempt at it, a clean reset. Now, in my brain, what happened is instead of thinking, oh snap, I'm starting to mess this up, I should log, here's what happened. I went through a couple phases of thinking. First, I said, yeah, I can make it to the other side and complete the memory game. And I started walking. And then as the wave expanded further, I was like, okay, I'm not going to make it to the other side. My brain actually said, I got 12k ES with Trickster Suppress. I might survive. I have good max res. I might survive. The thing about this is I am pretty sure this character is close to the threshold of potentially tanking a regular Maven memory game. But the thing is, do you really want to risk I might survive in hardcore? No, you do not play with fire. That is a bad idea. So learn from a mistake like this. Learn to have a threshold or risk tolerance where you say, okay, this is dangerous. I need to just back out. Because you have to understand, rerunning the zone, redoing the map, refarming whatever the boss fight was, is always going to be faster than re-leveling your character from zero and re-gearing. That is always going to take immensely longer. So word of caution, have a personal rule, something where you tell yourself, I'm going to log out. It's not going to feel innate or natural because if you've played softcore for a really long time like myself, it's going to be hard to do, but try to set yourself some sort of mental barrier that says, if I see my character go to half HP, I'm out. You know, something like that I'd recommend will go a long way. And one little thing about logging out, since they have added the ability to pause the game with the escape key, this gives you a period where you can de-escalate the situation you're in and think thoroughly. So number one is if you are in a situation where you're feeling like, okay, I could die here, press escape. Have some sort of response like that where you look at your HP, you assess the situation. Should I log here? If you've gotten this far, generally it probably means you should log. If you are going to log though, I want to express there's a very distinct difference between clicking exit to login screen and exit to character selection screen. If you were in a dangerous situation and you press this button, you could very well be half a second away from dying. Now, the thing is, when you click exit to character selection screen, this is actually a slower disconnect, and you have a window where you can take damage and still die. So for example, when I press this, watch how long it takes to go to the screen. Notice how there's like that half a second period where I'm still in the game. You are 100% still damageable within that time frame. You do this, there is a chance you die in that window. Not super likely, it's a small window, but it can happen. Now look at the difference when you click exit to login screen. See how immediate it is? It doesn't go back to the pause not being there. This is an immediate, like there's no chance for you to die. If you've gotten to this pause, you are safe if you click the login or exit to login screen. So I just want to stress that it's very different. I didn't know this and somebody pointed it out to me. It's very specific difference, and it will a lot of times save you from death. So do consider that as well. All right, so that is my spiel on the 4 main tips that will hopefully help you get through the campaign. Trying to just stress the importance of gearing, picking a strong class, having a rule for yourself where you're saying, I'm going to log out if it gets this risky, and just a bit of muling, just because the hardest part is when you start. If you can get a little bit of extra gear from that early stage, the likelihood you can get through Act 1 goes up immeasurably. Now, the last thing I would say is pick some sort of personal goal and have some fun with it. For me, Gauntlet, I started like 2 gauntlets ago, and my first goal was I just want to get through the campaign. And it was a fun basically test to see, if I could even do it. And it was one of my first times doing hardcore, and I had a lot of fun just trying to push and make my character get through this challenge and overcome it. And then the next gauntlet, my goal was to get to Uber bosses. Now, we did die at Uber bosses. We'll see, maybe this gauntlet I can go for clearing, but having some sort of goal to try to push for, I think makes it a lot of fun, as well as just seeing how far you can go to begin with. Anyways, that's my top 5 tips for Gauntlet. Hopefully you guys that are thinking about playing it are excited and have a lot of fun, and good luck. Try to die less than Ziz does. I'll see y'all later. Take care, Exiles.